Welcome to Innovator's Dilemma. I'm so excited about this topic because it's going to be, and also the panel. I have here Martin, who is has 2 decades of experience in financial services. Now he's Chief Risk Officer and Executive Vice President of MCAP, one of Canada's largest independent mortgage finance companies. We have Amir here. Amir is Head of Home Lending at BMO. He manages a portfolio about $200 billion in residential lending and home line of credit. And we have Jason here, Executive Vice President and Chief Risk Officer of goeasy. And we all experienced goeasy growing significantly over the past few years and helping Canadians who can't easily get access to credit to get access to credit facility they need and move up to prime lending, one of the leading non-prime lenders in Canada. Now, today's topic, Innovation's Dilemma, that I'm so excited about, is about being practical with regard to innovation. Because innovation doesn't need to be just ideas. It should be about how to bring those ideas safely to life and drive the business outcome. So without further ado, let me get started with the conversation. And you're going to hear some, I would say, deep insights from the speakers and panelists today. Amir, let me start from you, right? BMO is a large bank. You've seen so much of, innovation efforts in various cases across various lines. Let's start with no-regret use cases. What are some use cases you've seen, you've experienced that you believe innovation have driven significant value without a ton of executive challenges and risk? Essentially, what are the low-hanging fruit or no-regret use cases to get started with? If you share your experience with the audience, that would be great.
Sure, thank you. As you said, different type of innovations and active projects have a different level of risk. So there's always going to be risk there. It's just how proactive we are in mitigating the risk. In our space, in the mortgage business space, one of the things that we tried and we think is rather innovative is around the mortgage renewal experience. As you know, in Canada, all mortgage rates are negotiated. And there is this perception and view by clients that if I have an eyeball-to-eyeball conversation, I can get a better rate than if I do renew my mortgage online. So us, leveraging technology and also client insight, develop the journey for the clients to be able to both seamlessly to renew the mortgage, but also provide them advice. And that's a customized advice based on the client specific situation. The other piece we had to overcome, and took a long time, was convincing clients that the rate they're getting is customized for them, and they get the best rate possible. So as we go through our price optimization, there was an ability to provide those specific rates to clients. Now, that takes a little bit longer as we have to plant the seed early in the journey, and this kind of nurturing of the process. But at the end of the day, it provided value to the client, as the client was a much simpler, easier mortgage renewal transaction. It reduced costs from our side. So as a service provider, it provided business benefit. But also, it allowed us to deliver experience to the clients where they wanted. So more of a customized, controlled experience versus a more interaction. Now, it's not for every client, it's not for every situation, but that's where we try to be more innovative and then do it in phases. That took a number of years for us to get where we are, but that was managing the risk and also be able to implement it in phases.
Absolutely. And obviously, when plugging numbers, especially at the scale of BMO, it becomes very obvious that the business benefit by far, outweigh the investment here. Are there also any use cases or anything you've seen where your investment innovation drive the costs down, drive productivity?
Yeah, that's a good question. So in our space, when we look at innovation, we mainly focus on the middle office, back office. So using automation and innovation to make our processes more efficient from a process automation. And that allows both, faster processing for us, but also removes costs from the activities that are more manual in nature. So we do that on the mortgage application journey. As is a very labor-intensive process. So we leverage technology and automation in order to automate and remove some of those manual activities from the process, which directly impacts our bottom line and reduce our costs.
And Martin, Amir shared his experience in terms of how to drive innovation such that drives technical business value at the large bank. You influence strategy, data, and obviously risk as chief risk officer as one of the Canada's largest mortgage companies, but monoline versus a large multi-product bank. What is your view of some no-regret use cases around innovation that drive business value without a ton of executive challenges and risk?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I mean, the one I'm thinking about a lot at the moment is anti-money laundering, because obviously within Canada that's a big topic. And FinTrack has been very active lately. And so the amount of work we've got for AML has significantly increased. And having spent a bit of time with the investigators working on it, I think there's a massive amount of potential to use robotic process automation in some of the checks. For example, when you follow up people who get adverse media, when you do transaction monitoring, all of those things, there's a lot of potential. So that's sort of something we're very actively looking at, with the aim of not growing the team, but being able to produce high-quality work at a much higher volume.
Yeah, thank you. And Jason, what is your view of no-regret innovation use cases?
I'd say we have two. One would be the decision to ingest consumer banking data in our underwriting process. So we started doing that in 2017. And at the time, that was considered a little avant-garde. There was no automated way to do that. We were fortunate enough to be able to partner with a firm to give us that capability. And because we could manage how much and how quickly we would ingest that data and use it to inform our adjudication process, the risk was quite limited. The opportunity was quite large. The other use case I would speak about is, at least at goeasy, because data is so much integral to our decision-making process, we've made conscious and regular investment decisions to upgrade the analytical services platforms that guide our modeling capability. That's part of our so-called secret sauce, if you will. So to me, those are no-brainer use cases because they will pay back over time. The benefits aren't always immediately realizable, but almost inevitably with these updated versions of new analytical software capabilities, speed to market, sophistication of modeling, and just the flexibility and ingenuity that some of these programs now offer are pretty evident in how they benefit the business. So that would be the two.
Okay, fantastic. And if you move up from no regret, low-hanging fruit use cases, then it's almost obvious you've got to do that, where there is, I would say, more thoughtful strategies required to kind of like estimate the benefit, look at the cost, anticipate the execution challenges, anticipate the risks. Is there anything you've done before you're targeting, or any ideas around how you move up from the no-regret use cases to more advanced innovation with potential significant benefit, yet exhibit challenges to be thoughtful about?
Yeah, I think, and I know you're going to ask me another question in a bit, so I'll save some of the answer, but I think really what we were talking about this before the panel began, right. None of us is going to tell you what to innovate in your particular jobs or in your roles.
Exactly.
What we can offer is different perspectives on a framework for how you might be able to go about doing that. What to think about, what pitfalls to avoid, what frameworks to adopt when evaluating an investment in a new piece of platform or an improvement in an AML process. You pick whatever use case you like. I think that the challenge that you face as you move up from those no-regret use cases is making sure you have a robust decision-making framework that allows you a 360-degree view of the decisions that you're making. And some of that may involve the decision to accept a high degree of risk, but it's having that robust framework and a dialogue to revisit that framework with key stakeholders that ultimately becomes more important as you move further and further away from those no-brainer use cases. Yeah.
And let's go deeper. Sorry, Martin, you wanted to jump in. You go ahead, and then I'll go deeper to the framework.
I was just going to build on what Jason is talking about. I've often found in my career, not only at MCAP, but throughout, that the thing that stops you from innovating is the very first step, which is convincing the organization that it's actually a good idea. So typically you come up with a great idea, and then you figure out what the benefits will be and the cost. And if you're a bit smart, you say, well, these will be the risks, and this is the ease of implementation. And somebody says, what are the mitigants? And the thing gets a life of its own. And if you're really honest, very often you're just guessing at all of that because you haven't actually done it. So I always say that's the transition of patent nonsense to disguised nonsense. But so what I experienced, the thing that works for me is to run small proofs of concept where you actually prove out that the benefit is there. And you also figure out what the real risks are, the unanticipated consequences. And obviously you have to invest a little bit, but you can use duct tape and bubble gum to sort of make it work for the test. And it sometimes has an interesting additional benefit that sort of pays back the cost, which is the rest of the organization, sort of the control group, starts working a lot smarter as well because they want to beat the proof of concept. And so you sort of get a sort of a great improvement in performance overall. And the idea is just then to run a POC sort of culture and do these more frequently, which turns the whole thing from a big decision into this is just what we do from time to time.
Yeah, so that's your approach to de-risking it to get it started.
That's right.
Right. Anything else from the panelists around the framework you're using to figure out how do you measure success? How do you prioritize innovation cases?
Yeah, I think, just building on the comments here, the other thing is important is not being emotionally attached to that solution and just trying to prove that this is going to work no matter what. That being agile, be able to say, I was trying to go left and I tried this one, this. It didn't work. Now I can pivot to the right and continue innovating and tweaking the process is important. Because if you get emotionally attached, then you may end up with a solution looking for a problem, which, to Martin's point, becomes very difficult to sell in-house.
I think that's a fantastic point. Often when you do proofs of concept, let's say 2 out of 3 is sort of mediocre, and it's totally fine just to discard them. But you have the culture of keep going on it. And the more you invest, the more emotional you become. So if you spend small dollars to test something, it's easier to step away afterwards.
I think the other thing we face as leaders when it comes to innovation, or at least I've faced it, is, and in a growing organization I think this is true, and I also think in a bank it's also true, is the need to balance evolutionary change with revolutionary change. If you think about a lot of what we as, whether we're bankers or lenders or tech supporters, fill in the blank, a lot of some of the biggest gains and wins that businesses get aren't necessarily by coming up with that next great light bulb and knocking it out of the park. Yes, there are some examples. If you own an Apple product, you might agree with me. But in a lot of cases when it comes to financial services, it's about incrementalism. It's not always about completely upending the business model, though there is arguments and are arguments to be made that can also be done with success. I think the hard part we as innovators have to grapple with is how much change is the right amount of change. And both Amir and Martin, I think, made some really good comments around different pieces of the framework that you got to consider. The one I would have all of you think about that is one that I'm still, quite frankly, wrestling with is how much change an organization can actually deal with. Because part of what drives how much of a difference or a change you're going to bring into your organization is a function with that organization's capacity to adapt to change. And if you're not taking that into consideration at the outset of thinking about what strategic initiative or project or idea you want to bring forward, notwithstanding all of the other comments that were made here by the panelists, you may have the greatest idea of sliced bread, but if none of the people in your audience know how to eat bread, you're going to have a problem. And I know that may not be the greatest euphemism, but it still gives you an idea of thinking about not every change and not every innovation needs to be an absolute leap forward. In fact, if you look over the case over most of human history, many of the innovations weren't necessarily the invention of the printing press or the creation of some other significant adjustment. It's about making that hub and spoke in that wheel that was created just a little more smooth, a little more fast, and that can sometimes get you a lot further than you can think about. So that would just be one other thing I would have people think on when it comes to thinking about innovation, is think about how much change you and the organization can actually withstand as you contemplate bringing it forward.
Jason, if you keep building on amazing comment you had, if you look at goeasy, years ago, you were like much smaller, very entrepreneurial. You've grown a lot in a profitable way, which is amazing. But I anticipate, I'm like naturally as you grow, you have greater level of bureaucracy. You have a lot of team alignment to navigate through, a legacy system that inevitably being built, and so forth. And you on top of it, you're mentioning about building that capacity to change and innovate. Right? So how do you navigate these challenges now versus when you started years ago and drive growth? Because as you evolution where you grow, things will be different, right? How do you navigate now versus then? Because probably there's a lot of people in the audience that are various history of growth. Some where you were 10 years ago, some where you're now, some where you're going to be 5 years later. And there are some nuanced differences here.
Yeah, I mean, I think it holds true for all three of our organizations. They're big, right? They're very big, especially BMO. They're very big. So you think about how hard it is to do stuff that's new and innovative when you have to go through a whole process to get money approved and boards to say yes or committees to say yes. I'd say the biggest challenge that we face at goeasy, it may be different for my panelists, is our biggest enemy is time. Our biggest enemy is time because for these new strategic initiatives to really gain a foothold in the organization and compete with everything else that we're doing, we need to spend enough time to really think these ideas through and think them through in a way that you're not unwilling to challenge and disrupt the very idea that you started with. I'd say what we really did well in our early days of goeasy is we made some really good, thoughtful decisions, and we were really quick and purposeful about how we would go about doing it. The challenge we face now is we can still come up with those ideas, but now they have to compete with 15 other things we need just to keep the lights on and the business running. So how do you choose and pick from within that grouping? You need to devote a sufficient amount of time and make planning an ongoing part of the exercise, not something you visit once a year when you need to build next year's operating plan. That's something you have to revisit on a regular basis, because if you don't give it the time and the attention it deserves, your ideas won't necessarily be all that well thought through, and now you're just going to have to work that much more hard to get those ideas bought into by the very stakeholders that we have to deal with in our own companies. So I would say for me, it's just about using your time much more purposefully and wisely and being willing to disrupt your own ideas from within rather than have someone come in and do it from outside.
Yeah, I will build on that one. I mean, as you said, some of the banks are perhaps larger than some others, but that issue of the prioritization and complexity exists everywhere. You got in a relationship bank, doesn't matter how big you are, there's a limited amount of investment dollars and resources available. So you go through that process of what is the right thing to do for the parent company as a whole, for the line of business, and have ability to make sure to maximizing the return for the shareholder from the investments that you make. And you're making those trade-offs, either not only among different lines of businesses within the organization, but even within your own line of business, the different things that you want to work on. And there are going to be times that you're going to hit the wall. And I think the best thing is that looking at a fact-based approach to see what's the best way to pivot and change our approach to continue delivering value. And sometimes the answer is just stop. We hit the wall and we just move to something else. And sometimes you can actually continue and tweaking and approaching. But that continuous prioritization and looking at the best return the organization can get from the investment, both dollar and people, is critical.
I can probably add 2 thoughts to that. So through my career, I've sort of worked for much smaller companies, kind of in the startup range, and also for large organizations like Bank of Montreal. And the interesting thing is when you work for a really small company, you almost won a revolution. And innovation is the first thing you talk about. Because if you don't innovate, then you're probably not getting paid end of next month. While if you move the other way at the bigger organization that has more capital and more time and much more recurring revenue, there's just not the motivation to innovate. And it's also much more complex because whatever you do, it could compete with some of the other product lines. It could sort of damage some of the existing revenue streams. And I always imagine the leaders meeting, and if you imagine the agenda, it's probably like the item number 7. And then if the meeting runs over on point number 3, you just never get to number 7. But everybody agrees it's super important. So it gets quite challenging, I'm sure, as Amir would agree, to actually keep the discipline of innovating.
If just a bill on top of that again, a little bit further and deeper. So there are also differences, nuanced difference in managing innovation for a multi-product, larger bank, mid-sized bank, monoline. Can we a bit further elaborate on that as well?
Yeah, so would you say for a launch, it's just more complex when you're running it? Of course, it's much more complex to work out innovation, to politically sort of make it work for everybody. There's many more people who would say no to it. So lots of reasons why it's easier to work for a smaller place when you innovate. So I'd love to think that MCAP is sort of in the middle of the range where we have to innovate, but we have a bit of time. So.
I was just want to add on that one. I mean, as as Martin mentioned, there's a complexity and challenges when you're in a large organization. You have multiple line of businesses competing with this limited amount of resources and investments. The flip side of that is that if you have a solution and you're working on some sort of an innovative approach that will benefit more than one line of business, then that will actually get you momentum. So if there's something that we do for, let's say, for mortgages, but that innovation, that change could also help the credit card business or could help the unsecured lending business, then all of a sudden you got a whole organization behind you and they give you air cover to really move faster. So it's a double-edged sword that you have a complexity, but potentially the benefit could be exponentially higher if you can be expanded beyond just one product.
And then further on topic of innovation, do we have a luxury of ignoring it if we're doing well? Is this an option? Is there a risk for not innovating and building an innovation plan?
I'll maybe start on that one. Well, when I was a kid, there was an ad for a cigarette lighter. It was called Zippo. And the ad was, in an ever-changing world, some things don't. And the whole idea was that they used it in the Second World War in the trenches. It still works good enough for 1980, right? But I think that's a niche case. I do think you almost have to future-proof the business by innovating. And I'm a big fan of building optionality, which means you don't necessarily have to do the full-blown launch, but you have to know that you can do it when you need to. And so building optionality is, I think, is crucial, and thinking about what the other guy is going to do is just as important. The only case I can think of not innovating is if you're big enough to just acquire anybody else that innovates. That could be a way of actually doing it.
Yeah, I agree. I think the option of not innovating is really not an option. Depending on, and we have to think about innovation in a much broader sense. There could be innovation in the technology, in the process, in the product. There could be many forms of innovation. But in a competitive industry such as financial services, you do need to innovate, not only to stay ahead of your competitors, but also meeting your clients' ever-changing demands and expectations. And that will impact both top line from what you're offering to the clients and how you service them, all the way to process automation and reducing costs out of the system that allows you to reinvest back into the business.
Yeah, I would agree. I would say that, yes, we don't have a choice. We have to innovate. It's been my experience, both in small and large businesses that I've worked for, that the absence of innovation invites a state of lethargy, leading to atrophy. And then when it comes to how that affects the employees, the word I would tell you that's actually the absolute public enemy number one when it comes to managing and growing a business, it's apathy. It's actually not opposition. I'd be happy if people didn't like an idea that I brought forward and were vehemently opposed to it, because that shows me that they're passionate about something, even if that passion is the status quo. But if they're apathetic and their answer is, yeah, I don't care if you innovate or not, that's the death knell of an organization. Because if you don't innovate within your own company, your competitors will do it for you at some point. So I don't think we have that choice anymore. The key is to make sure that we can stimulate that desire, that innovation idea through small POCs and other areas of being creative. Because again, as we said before, as you get bigger, it's harder to do innovation and harder to do innovation right. So if you can find a nuance to get 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 smaller ideas off the ground, even though they may not necessarily break the bank in terms of their impact to the company, that may actually derive more pleasure, more satisfaction, more opportunities to then build something bigger down the road. And that's a trade-off you might want to consider that's different.
I really like that point, actually. So the opposite of innovation is apathy. Because if people are fighting innovation, at least they care, right? And at least you can improve the idea, because I always get scared when I have an idea and nobody pushes back, because then it just feels random to me. Like, you have to actually interact with people to improve an idea and sort of group think it a bit further. But apathy I would say, is the opposite of innovation.
So in a former conversation today, Jason mentioned about building capacity to change, right? And then you can easily just buy innovation. Your internal people need to elevate, and that's part of it. Martin, you've been at McKinsey, when you're actually advising executive as an external person, how to make trade-off, how to make decisions. Then you worked at BMO at a large company, then at MCAP. What's your view of building capacity to change, especially when it comes to do we do it? Should we do it all internal? Should we do it external? Should we balance it? How do we balance it? There's a lot of nuances there. I'm just wondering, what's your perspective around internal versus external and potentially balancing acts here?
Well, that's a great question. So I would sort of start by talking, how do you create capacity to change and appetite to change? And I think the way of not doing it is top-down by sort of telling people to innovate. It's a little bit like when you get to a party and people tell you to have fun. That's sort of the biggest party killer. And so I believe in the bottom-up approach, where you sort of incent people at the lower levels and you pick some use cases sort of at the junior level that work super well and give people the visibility out of that. So I'm a big believer in bottom-up, and often the people who actually do the work already know what is the next best thing to do. The executives just have to wake up and talk to them, right? So that would sort of be the approach we used years ago when I was a consultant, to create the spaces, like at the most junior level, get people to start innovating. Whether buy or build, i.e. using consultants or doing it yourself, it's a great question. As a rule of thumb, I would say if you want it to be competitive advantage, you probably want to try and figure it out yourself, so you own it for a bit on your own. If it's the kind of thing that you just want to be as good as everybody else, consultants are fantastic to speed it up and get you to catch up with where everybody else is. Sort of as a first cut at an answer.
I would say, Hamid, that was a good question. As you think about how you start that innovation and how do you get it embedded in the company's DNA, it does help if you start with a business problem first and business strategy. So that this is what you want to solve, this is what you want to achieve, and then engage the right people, as Martin said, people who are familiar with that business and that issue, and then you can really embed that as part of our thinking, as part of our DNA, and then you can build from there. But starting with a business problem and the problem statement is critical. That would really guide the conversation and increase the focus of the team to solving for the right solutions.
Yeah, I think maybe last comment from me, one of the questions I love to ask when it comes to bringing new initiatives forward is, what happens if we don't do it? Right? What will happen in the organization if we don't pursue option A, option B, option C, fill it in? I'm always intrigued by the answers I get when people bring these ideas forward, because depending on how well thought through those ideas are, okay, well, we can't do this. All right, no problem. But if they come back with an answer that says, here's the quantifiable impact to our business if we don't do it, or here's the strategic imperative of what it means to not do it, or here's how our employees are going to think about it as a result of not doing it, those are very powerful statements that put that idea in a completely different light and a different way to consider. So I often find that it's how you frame the questions around innovative ideas if you don't do them. Because I think we're all conditioned through the organizations we work for, whether it's McKinsey, MCAP, BMO, goeasy, to build a framework to show why something should be done. But another way to think about it is, well, why shouldn't it be done? It just gets you to spin it slightly differently and come up with maybe a complementary set of arguments that maybe people weren't anticipating. And maybe that's just enough to get you over the hump to get that idea over and pursued.
So if you go, because we have about 3 minutes left, if we want to have each of you a concrete remark, whether it's about the framework or how to measure success, how to prioritize it, whether lesson learned from failure success or something else that you think the audience could take away, what would it be? Maybe, Martin, we can get started with you.
Right, so part of innovation is also to shamelessly steal from other people. And so I'm going to steal the idea from Jason. What I learned in this panel is the opposite of innovation is apathy. And if you have apathy, you're basically dead. So you need to innovate to stop that.
Yeah, I would say the agility that, if you do face a challenge, just find another way. And as long as you're committed and you know that you expect the right outcome, just find another way to continue to innovate. And don't limit the innovation to just one definition. It's a broader definition.
Yeah, great point. And I'd probably say, be thoughtful about this. Innovating is hard, right? It doesn't come to all of us automatically in a dream, or a light bulb doesn't flash over our heads. You gotta stick with it. If it were easy, everyone would innovate and everything would change at a rapid pace. I don't necessarily think that's always healthy, but it just means that the ideas that usually get more treadway, they get more building in an organization, are ones that are just given their due and consideration. And I think what the panel has tried to give you are some ideas of how you can bring those ideas forward. But ultimately, every approach is very much unique to the individual and the organization you work for. So my last comment would be get to know the company you work for and how it thinks about innovation. And if you don't know how it thinks about it, then maybe it's time to either go find that out or teach it.
Okay, fantastic. And with that, we conclude this panel. Thank you, everyone.
Amazing. Thanks so much. That was great.